Joining us for more on that is Sayyid Mohammed Marandi, a member of the Iranian delegation in Beijing from the Chinese capital, and also Hussein Askary, Southwest Asia coordinator at the Schiller Institute from Stockholm. Gentlemen, welcome. Sayyid Mohammed Marandi, if I could start with you, what do you expect for the Iranian government to gain from this visit, considering the wide-scale delegation that has accommodated President Ebrahim Raisi?
I think both Iran and China have a great deal to gain from the expansion of relations. Both countries are independent. Both are very influential, China being a global power and Iran being the most important power in West Asia. Iran being extremely wealthy when it comes to natural resources and having a highly educated society. Plus, Iran's influence across West Asia is enormous. Iran has very powerful allies in Iraq, in Syria, in Lebanon, in Yemen, and of course, Iran and China are linked to one another, both by land and sea, Central Asia, and of course, the Persian Gulf and the South China Sea. So there are numerous ways in which the two countries can work together. China, of course, is highly developed in IT, and in new technologies. And of course, they share many joint interests with regards to terrorism that unfortunately the United States and its allies have expanded and supported in our part of the world, whether in Afghanistan in the 1980s and the 1990s, or in Syria and Iraq. So there's a lot that you can do together. And I think that as time goes by and with the increasing antagonism by the United States and both towards Iran and China and the huge events that are taking place across the globe, I think there's a lot of room for expanding ties. And I think that those expansions will be quite rapid.
Hussein, thank you very much, Sayyid Mohammed. Hussein, we've seen a lot of talk, a lot of discussion from the Iranian president, as well as the Chinese side, as well as the Russian presidency and officials there about unilateralism and American unilateralism, coercive measures, US unilateral sanctions, all three countries of which are subject to by Washington. Do you see these meetings or these kind of meetings, these kind of dialogues between these three countries, would it be possible to counter this unilateralism?
Yes, definitely. But I think this visit, from the way President Raisi was received by President Xi Jinping and the way the Chinese media I have been following have been describing this visit, this is so multidimensional and so timely. It takes on a historical character. First of all, the international context, as Mr. Mohammadi said, and you described, we have a system of unilateralism. The unipolar system has brought us to the verge of a global war now in Ukraine, where there's no talk about peace, but there's only talk about more weapons, more attacks, and the attempt to destroy Russia. And also, of course, there has been this historical background with the sanctions against Iran and now the targeting of China. I think there's a national, regional, and global dimension to this visit, and also the developments around it. On the national bilateral level, these agreements, which we will see be signed, we had a look at the general declaration, which was already signed in 2016, on the kind of cooperation between Iran and China, two ancient civilizations, living civilizations with enormous potential in terms of Iran's geographical position as a bridge between Asia, East Asia, and the Mediterranean, West Asia, and into Europe. Iran has enormous natural resources, but also human resources and an ambitious economic plan to become an industrial nation. Now, this is part and parcel of the Belt and Road Initiative, and also it's an embodiment that both the old Silk Road, which the two nations shared, and the new Silk Road, which the two nations are about to share and build upon, is a dialogue of civilization which has brought fruits both in old times and potentially in today of economic, technological, cultural, scientific, and philosophical and artistic dimensions. So this is a huge, huge development. And interestingly, on a regional level, China's foreign policy, which is against building blocks, which is against building alliances and counter alliances, is going to integrate this region within the Belt and Road Initiative, where nations who are so-called on the west side in the Gulf, as we saw with President Xi Jinping's visit and summits in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia in December, is not going to split this region as the West has been trying by allying with the Gulf states against Iran, but by integrating Iran and the Gulf regions and Syria, Iraq, and the rest of the region, which has been infested with conflicts, with a new economic and a strategic relationship where all nations are equal. This is what is fascinating about this, that China is the world's largest industrial economy, in my view, and Iran, which has been under sanctions, but still China treats Iran as an equal. And this is very, very important today. On the global dimension, as your guest said, that we have a unilateral system which is now has doomed humanity to failure. It has doomed itself economically, socially, and culturally to failure. And there's need for a new system in the world where nations are treated equally, but also can cooperate for mutual benefit, as the Chinese say, a community of a shared future for all mankind, where you have a new system. I mean, there's a fact that the power, economic power in the world has shifted to the east, with China as at its core. And the going east is no longer a matter of taste, it's a necessity for many nations. But this does not mean that we should have a new Cold War or a new split world, but that the West should learn the lessons of the past 30 years of wars and interventions and destruction, and how China has managed through the Belt and Road Initiative, through this friendly relationship with other nations, to build a completely new system. Now we have, Iran was welcomed into the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. China played an important role in that. Now Iran is poised to join the BRICS Plus, which is a very important development. But also one of the signs we have now is that both Iran, Russia, and China and many other nations are working together to de-dollarize the world financial system, which has been used as a weapon by the United States and the West to target these nations.
Okay.
So we will have a system where nations can use their national currencies, a basket of currencies, to do trade and stay out of the long arm of American justice, which has brought many problems to the world economy.
Okay, so Saeed Marandi, just expanding on what Mr. Askary there just said just there, considering the vast resources in each of these countries' hands, be it the energy that Iran possesses, the technology that China possesses, for example, the military, and if you take into account Russia, also the NATO war with Russia, would you view closer cooperation between Iran, China, and Russia as a threat to a declining world order led by the United States regime?
I think that the whole of Asia is on the rise, and there's a convergence of interests between the major powers in Asia, because the West, the collective West, does not want to see its hegemony diminished. So Iran recognizes this, China, Russia recognizes, but so do other important countries in South Asia. And then, of course, there are Central Asian countries that are in the middle of these powers in Asia. So Asia alone, through this natural convergence, which is being pushed forward even faster, largely due to the fact that the United States and the Europeans are constantly antagonizing governments and sanctioning governments, whether it's Russia, whether it's Iran, and increasingly China, and also by constantly trying to prevent India from establishing greater ties with these Asian powers, the United States and Europeans are pushing these countries towards greater convergence at a faster pace. So it's really the United States and the Europeans who consider this to be a threat. For the rest of the world, or the global South, Asia, what they want is their sovereignty. They want the ability to expand economically, to bring about prosperity, whereas the Europeans and the Americans want to remain the center of the world. So it is their aggressiveness and their hegemony that is the problem. If they were to change their behavior, obviously the rest of the world would welcome a new approach, including Iran. But I think that if anyone looks at the map and they see what is happening, they recognize that the integration of Asia is in the interest of the people of Asia.
Right.
They are natural, they complement one another, and they have the incentive. So the map is changing fast, and the Europeans and the Americans have been sanctioning country after country, and they've been involved in war after war, and that has increased the pace of their decline. So as Asia rises, the West declines, and the world changes.
Said Mohammed Marandi, thank you very much indeed for that. Let me just pose one last question to Mr. Askary. Mr. Askary, what are the strategic, political, and economic outcomes, in your opinion, of this 3-day visit by such a large delegation led by Iranian President Ebrahim Raisi?
I think, as was announced earlier in the joint declaration for the establishment of a comprehensive economic and strategic partnership between China and Iran, we will see a large number of bilateral economic agreements based on building infrastructure, because Iran is a huge country with a huge potential, but it still needs massive investments in infrastructure, transport, water, power. We will see a number of large-scale industrial projects for establishing industries in Iran, utilizing the natural resources. Now, the natural resources in Iran is not only oil and gas. There is copper, there are iron, there are other minerals inside Iran. There's a huge human resource, and also utilizing Iran's position as a bridge between East and West and South, the Indian Ocean and Northern Europe, through the Caspian Sea, the Caucasus, into Russia, and so on and so forth. But we will see this. We saw also in the China-Saudi agreements, we will have something similar in high technology areas of telecommunications, artificial intelligence, nanotechnology, space exploration, and nuclear power development, civilian nuclear power development. We will see a long list of this kind of projects, which Iran needs very much for its industrial development, but also China is through this can leverage its ability as an advanced industrial nation and building partnerships. What is strategically important in this, that what China is doing regarding Iran and the rest of the countries in the region, is that showing an example of how the idea of friendship and against the zero-sum game. With your guest is talking about the West thinks that if China rises, if Asia rises, we will fall. So it's an impossibility for them that all humanity can rise. China wants to prove that actually by exporting technology to Iran and other countries, by sharing the fruits of civilization with other nations, China can win, those nations can win. This is a very important lesson for the West, that unless you develop other continents like Africa, Asia, Latin America with modern technology, with infrastructure building, you cannot have a peaceful and safe world. And I think this is a very, very important lesson for everyone to learn from how China is dealing with these things, how building foreign policy on the basis of win-win cooperation and not zero-sum games, getting out of the geopolitics which has plagued humanity at least the last 200 years, and getting into a new world system where nations are treated as equal in a friendly manner, and to achieve the goals of humanity for preventing poverty, hunger, disease, and all these things which were in the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, identified by all nations as the joint goal for all humanity. And I think China is showing a great example of how that could be achieved.
Okay, let me thank our guests for their contribution to this special coverage on the Iranian president's 3-day visit to China. Said Mohammad Morandi is a member of the Iranian delegation in Beijing, joining us from the Chinese capital. And also Hussein Askary is Southwest Asia coordinator at the Schiller Institute, joining us from the Swedish capital, Stockholm.